Hi, we're Oscar, Danica, and Emilio. The objective of our presentation is to analyze President Donald Trump's recent proposition for his new tax reform in a historical context against the ones made by President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s and by Trump's predecessor Barack Obama. In this context, the theory of supply-side economics, or the trickle-down effect, is also going to be discussed. With Donald Trump getting closer to his 100th day in office, he released the tax reform that he was talking about in his presidential campaign. The proposition was released on the 26th of April 2017 and has already gotten a strong reaction. The goals of his proposition is stated to be: grow the economy and create millions of jobs, simplify our burdensome tax code, provide tax relief to American families, especially middle-income families, lower business tax from one of the highest in the world to one of the lowest. So we're going to focus on the reduction of corporate tax, where President Trump is proposing a tax cut from 35 to 15%. The tax cut is said to be financed by the economic growth that it will create in the long run, an argument often used to motivate supply-side economic reforms like this one. Supply-side economics, often called the trickle-down effect by its opponents, relates to the theory that economic growth can be achieved by initially lowering taxes for companies. While this makes it possible for companies to provide goods and services at a lower price, the demand and investment will increase. The increase in production will be followed with a higher demand for employees and a decrease in unemployment. With more people getting paid salaries, the consumption will increase along with a further increase in production and economic growth in the economy's GDP. The theory of supply-side economics has a lot of opponents and is often blamed for not working and only being a cover-up for decreasing taxes for the richest, and that these profits in fact don't trickle down. Economist John Galbraith once called the horse and sparrow theory and defining it by: if you feed the horse enough oats, some will pass through to the road for the sparrows. Economics also often claim that the cuts of the top taxes has little or no correlation at all to increasing savings, investments, and productivity growth. One of the presidents that is most associated with the supply-side economics is the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. Through his policies of Reaganomics and the passing of the Economic Recovery Tax Act, or the ERTA, of 1981, he lowered the marginal income tax by 23% over 3 years. Using the same arguments as earlier posted, Reagan argued that this would increase the economic growth. Even though Reagan supporters often claim that the tax act helped the economic growth in the 80s, which eventually decreased the national deficit, many critics claim that this was mostly due to inflation and that the theory behind the supply-side economics didn't work in practice. Studies show that the tax policies with lower taxes implemented through ERTA neither increased the demand among the lower sectors or increased the revenues of the economy or increased the consumption of these sectors. Instead, the further result of the tax act was that unemployment rate raised to 10.8% in November 1982, which was the highest level since the Great Depression. Through his policies, Reagan also increased the national debt with $1.86 trillion, which represents a 186% increase of the debt from his successor, President Carter, often compared with Reagan and often criticized on some of the same aspects as unemployment and increase of the national debt is Donald Trump's predecessor, Barack Obama. The Obama administration placed an emphasis on using tax policy to correct an unfair wealth distribution that was apparent in the United States. He wanted to cut taxes for the lower class, increase taxes for the upper class, and maintain tax rates for the middle class, and ultimately wanted to preserve the tax cuts implemented by Bush previously. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, signed into law by President Barack Obama in February 2009, the Recovery Act is a package of economic measures with the main objectives being the reactivation of the economy and prevention or reversal of a recession by boosting employment and spending. The figures on this slide exemplify the proposals of the Act. Results of the ARA are varied. Over the Obama presidency, they were able to create an average of 1.6 million jobs a year for 4 years and prevented a significant increase in poverty. 5.3 million people would have fallen under the poverty line in 2010 without it. As well as this, the stock market performed remarkably and tripled in value within 6 years. According to the National Association of Business Economists, the greatest effectiveness was in relation to physical infrastructure, unemployment benefits, expansion, and personal tax rate cuts, which was a major goal for the Obama administration. There is a lot of criticism towards the act for not achieving its proposed goals. For example, the unemployment rate was projected to be below 7% in 2011 with the ARA in place, but was at only 9.2%. Under the Obama administration, there was a 68% increase in national debt in 7 years, one of the worst national debts since Herbert Hoover. However, there are important factors to take into consideration when looking at these consequences. The GDP growth of the US beat the GDP growth of any other NATO member countries by the widest margin of any other president since World War II. It is important to note that Obama was handed the presidency during the Great Recession, which was not expected to be as severe when the ARA was drawn up, and that the US fared a lot better than any other developed countries in similar positions. So although ARA did not achieve its proposed goals, it's important to note the economic hand in which Obama was given and the economic atmosphere that worsened throughout the years which affected results of the ARA. The unemployment rate decreased and taxes were cut for the lower class, which resulted in help, all which can be concluded as positive results. It can be seen that President Johnson implemented similar policies during his presidency in regards to tax cuts and social expenditure. For example, the Revenue Act of 1964 cut individual income tax rates by up to 20%. Due to legislation and systems put in place by Johnson, the percentage of Americans living below the poverty line fell from 22.2% to 12.6% during his term. He also had one of the highest reductions in unemployment rates, much like Obama. Here we can see examples of two similar tax policies having a positive effect on poverty and unemployment rates. To finally compare Reagan and Obama's tax policies in order to reach a conclusion regarding Donald Trump's recent one and the effectiveness of the supply-side economics, it's, as mentioned earlier, important to remember which situations the presidents were handed. The graph to the right shows the unemployment levels during the respective presidency. In this one, we're going to focus on the first years of their respective presidencies, where the unemployment rates had its heights. In this case, it's of grave importance to remember that while the situation that Obama got thrown into was the middle of the economic crisis of 2008, Reagan created the unemployment situation with his own tax policies. The graph shows with clarity that once these policies were somewhat changed through the Tax Equity and Responsibility Act and the taxes were raised again, the unemployment steadily dropped again. Regarding the national debt, it's also important to understand the context of Obama's presidency. Even though being one of the presidents that has increased the national debt the most, together with Herbert Hoover, both Obama and Hoover were at the time facing huge economic crises. The policy of Obama is also regarded by some to have saved the country from a second Great Depression. Reagan, on the other hand, were during his presidency struggling with the economic recession that he himself started because of his fiscal policies. To conclude, Trump's tax policy is particularly similar to Ronald Reagan's Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981. The results of such act had devastating effects on the U.S. economy, culminating in the highest unemployment rate, 10.8%, since the Great Depression. Although Obama and Johnson's policies had some negative effects on the U.S. economy, overall they both helped unemployment rates and helped the lower class in a more direct way than the policies that relate to the trickle-down effect. To finish our presentation, we must say Trump's recent tax proposal does not seem likely to succeed its promised goals as far as the historical evidence shows us.